Well, it's always the same, every rock and roll band. It's not just Slade, it's every rock and roll band's the same. They're split up because egos, money.
Yeah.
At 79, Noddy Holder, the powerhouse voice and flamboyant frontman of Slade, has finally revealed the truth about his later years, and it is nothing short of heartbreaking. For decades, he was the face of glam rock, belting out anthems that defined a generation. With hits like Come On, Feel the Noise and Merry Xmas Everybody, Noddy became a legend, living larger than life on stage. But behind the glitter and the thunderous applause was a man carrying struggles that no one saw coming. Today, we uncover how one of rock's loudest voices has quietly endured some of his darkest battles. Neville John Noddy Holder was born on June 15, 1946, in Walsall, England, a working-class town that seemed worlds away from the glittering heights of international stardom. Growing up in a modest household, Noddy's early life was filled with the grit and resilience that would later define his personality. His father, a window cleaner, worked tirelessly to provide for the family, and Noddy often recalled how those early years taught him the value of hard work and persistence. Music, however, became his true escape. By the time he was a teenager, Noddy had already developed an ear for rock and roll. The sound of Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley blasted from his bedroom, fueling his dream of one day stepping onto a stage himself. His raspy, powerful voice was unmistakable, and soon he was performing in local pubs and clubs, fronting small bands while dreaming of something much bigger. In the mid-1960s, fate intervened when Noddy teamed up with guitarist Dave Hill, bassist, Jim Lee, and drummer Don Powell. Together, they formed a group that would eventually become Slade. At first, the band struggled to find their footing. They played under various names and experimented with different sounds, but the late 60s, music scene in Britain was fiercely competitive. Yet Noddy's unique voice, coupled with his unmistakable stage presence, made the band stand out. By the early 1970s, Slade had reinvented themselves as a glam rock powerhouse, with glittery costumes, outrageous hairstyles, and a sound that combined hard rock energy with irresistible pop hooks. They were unlike anything else in the charts. And at the heart of it all was Noddy Holder, his booming voice, commanding presence, and trademark top hat transforming him into a cultural icon. Songs like Come On, Feel the Noise, Mama We're All Crazy Now, and Goodbye to Jane stormed the UK charts, cementing Slade's reputation as one of the era's most successful acts. Their anthems became rallying cries for a generation that craved rebellion and joy. Noddy's voice, raw and gritty yet full of power, became instantly recognizable. When he shouted his famous "It's Christmas" on the band's holiday classic Merry Xmas Everybody, it wasn't just a lyric, it became a permanent part of British holiday tradition. But while the world celebrated their flamboyant success, Noddy and his bandmates were constantly under pressure. The music industry was brutal, the touring schedule relentless, and fame brought with it challenges few were prepared for. Yet Noddy, with his larger-than-life personality and iron will, kept pushing forward. His drive and energy were the fuel that kept Slade going during their toughest times. Karen, his wife, has often reflected that even in those early glory days, Noddy carried himself with both pride and humility. He never forgot his working-class roots, and he always maintained a sense of humor about his fame. He was loud on stage, but gentle at home. That contrast, the rock star who could command an arena and the man who enjoyed simple family moments, was part of what made Noddy so beloved by fans and friends alike. Still, the road to superstardom was not without personal sacrifice. Life on tour meant long stretches away from home, and Noddy often struggled to balance the demands of fame with the desire for a private, grounded life. Behind the scenes, the relentless pace began to take its toll, both physically and emotionally. Looking back, Noddy would later admit that while those years brought him fame and fortune, they also left scars that followed him into his later life. The public saw the glitter, the hits, and the wild performances, but they didn't see the exhaustion, the doubts, or the toll it took on his health. And as we'll discover in the next chapter, the golden years of Slade would become a double-edged sword. The same success that made Noddy a legend also laid the groundwork for the struggles that would haunt him in the years to come. By the early 1970s, Slade had exploded onto the global stage. Their gritty yet infectious sound, powered by Noddy Holder's unmistakable voice, set them apart from their contemporaries. While bands like T-Rex and Sweet embraced the glam rock movement, Slade went even further, pairing thunderous guitar, riffs with rowdy sing-along choruses that were impossible to ignore. For years, they dominated the UK charts, scoring 17 consecutive top 20 hits, including 6 #1 singles. At the center of this storm was Noddy. With his booming shout-singing style, flamboyant outfits, and outrageous charisma, he became the living embodiment of Slade. On stage, he was electric. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off him. His confidence radiated as he strutted across arenas in glittering costumes, belting out anthems that made entire stadiums feel like one giant party. Offstage, however, things weren't nearly as glamorous. Noddy later admitted that the non-stop pace of fame took a toll on both his body and his spirit. The band was constantly touring, sometimes performing hundreds of shows in a single year. Nights blurred into days, hotel rooms replaced homes, and sleep was often sacrificed for endless travel and promotional appearances. Noddy once joked that he could hardly remember what city he was in because the schedule was so relentless. Behind the scenes, tension also simmered. Success brought not only wealth and fame, but also enormous pressure. The music industry demanded constant reinvention, and Slade felt the weight of having to produce hit after hit. While their rebellious, working-class spirit gave them an edge, it also meant they were often underestimated by critics who dismissed glam rock as frivolous. Noddy, who poured his heart into every performance, sometimes found the lack of critical respect deeply frustrating. There were also personal sacrifices. Fame made privacy almost impossible. Noddy's powerful, gravelly voice, while iconic, suffered from the strain of endless touring. He pushed himself beyond his limits night after night, and the wear on his vocal cords began to show. Karen, his wife, would later reflect that while Noddy seemed invincible on stage, she often worried about the toll it was taking on his health. Financial strain also added to the stress. Despite Slade's massive success, the band never reached the same level of financial stability as some of their peers. Management decisions, the costs of touring, and the unpredictability of the music industry meant that Noddy and his bandmates didn't always see the rewards they expected for their hard work. This became a source of disappointment, especially as the glam rock era began to fade. Karen recalls how Noddy often came home from tours exhausted but unwilling to complain. He would tell stories of wild crowds and unforgettable moments, masking the physical pain and emotional weariness that came with them. But privately, the cracks were beginning to show. He loved his fans and cherished the joy music brought to others, but there were nights when he longed for a quieter, simpler life. By the late 1970s, the music scene began to shift. Punk rock and new wave emerged, pushing glam rock into the background. For Slade, it was a brutal blow. Once hailed as chart toppers, they now struggled to adapt to changing tastes. Though they enjoyed resurgences in the 1980s, particularly after bands like Quiet Riot covered their songs, the golden years of Slade were largely behind them. For Noddy, who had dedicated so much of himself to the band, the decline was painful. The very fame that had elevated him to legendary status was also what began to weigh him down. Years of screaming vocals, sleepless nights, and the constant grind of performance left scars, both physically and emotionally. Karen would later reveal that Noddy's struggles during this period were difficult to watch. He remained the larger-than-life frontman to the public, but at home, She saw a man wrestling with the price of success. In many ways, Slade's golden years defined Noddy's legacy, but they also set the stage for the heartbreak that would come later. The roaring applause, the glittering lights, and the #1 hits gave him everything he had dreamed of, but they also took more from him than he ever imagined, and in the next chapter we'll see how those sacrifices caught up with him in his later years, bringing challenges that would change his life forever. As the roar of the crowds began to fade and Slade's dominance slipped into memory, Noddy Holder found himself at a crossroads. For years, he had been the thunderous voice that defined a generation of rock fans, but fame doesn't last forever. The 1980s brought with it shifting musical trends, and though Noddy remained a household name, his life was moving in a very different direction, one that revealed the heartbreaking cost of years in the spotlight. The first and most visible struggle came with his voice. Noddy's signature rasp, the raw and fiery power that made Slade's anthems unforgettable, had been pushed to its absolute limits during the band's peak years. Endless tours, late nights, and a relentless need to shout over blaring amplifiers had damaged his vocal cords. He often spoke about how he could feel the strain every time he tried to hit the high notes. It wasn't just a matter of fatigue, it was pain. Singing, something that once brought him pure joy, had become an exhausting battle. Fans who adored his powerful delivery never suspected the silent agony he endured behind the microphone. By the late 1980s and into the early 90s, Noddy quietly stepped back from the intense life of a rock frontman. Publicly, he framed it as a natural transition, wanting to explore other creative outlets. Privately, Karen, his wife, knew it was much more than that. She later revealed that Noddy's health was already showing cracks. His voice needed rest, his body was slowing down, and emotionally, he carried the weight of years spent chasing stardom at full speed. Television and radio became his new refuge. Noddy carved out a successful second career as a media personality, lending his humor, charm, and storytelling ability to countless shows. For a while, this shift allowed him to stay connected with fans while stepping away from the physical toll of performing. But even as he smiled on camera, those closest to him could see the quiet battles he was fighting. One of the most heartbreaking challenges was Noddy's declining health. Though he kept much of his personal struggle away from the public eye, whispers of his condition began to surface. Later, it was revealed that Noddy had been diagnosed with cancer, a revelation that shocked fans who had always seen him as larger than life. The same voice that had roared across arenas now carried the weary tones of a man fighting for his life. Karen, who stood by him through it all, spoke openly about how difficult those years were. She described the endless hospital visits, the sleepless nights, and the emotional toll of watching someone she loved so deeply face such a brutal illness. "He never wanted people to feel sorry for him," she once said. "He carried on with dignity, with humor, even when it hurt." Noddy himself rarely complained, often deflecting questions with a joke, just as he had done his entire career. Yet behind closed doors, there were moments of real despair. For a man who had once thrived on the energy of thousands of screaming fans, the silence of recovery was deafening. He struggled with the loss of his voice, the loss of his stage, and the sense of identity that had defined him for decades. Fame had made him a legend, but it hadn't prepared him for the loneliness of illness. Financial concerns, too, lingered. While Noddy had certainly earned success, the rock business of the 70s was notoriously unforgiving when it came to long-term security. He had to reinvent himself multiple times, taking on voiceover work, media appearances, and television projects to ensure stability. To the world, these looked like exciting new ventures, but in truth, they were also survival. Despite the heartbreak, Noddy never lost his humor. Friends and family recall how, even during the hardest times, he would crack jokes to lighten the mood, turning even hospital corridors into places of laughter. His resilience became his shield, and his love for Karen and his children gave him a reason to keep fighting. The most gut-wrenching part of Noddy's later years, however, was how little the world truly knew of his suffering. Fans remembered the glitter, the stomping boots, and the booming "It's Christmas" anthem that still echoes every December. They celebrated the legend but rarely glimpsed the man behind it, the one who endured pain, who faced mortality with bravery, and who longed for the simplicity of normal life after decades of chaos. Noddy Holder may have once been a rock god, but he was also human. And it's in that humanity, his struggles, his sacrifices, and his heartbreaking decline, that his story becomes not just one of fame, but of resilience. As Noddy Holder entered his late 70s, the once larger-than-life frontman of Slade became a symbol of something far more poignant: resilience in the face of decline. For decades, fans had known him as the loud, brash, unforgettable voice behind one of the most iconic Christmas songs ever recorded. But behind the glitter, the platform boots, and the dazzling stage presence, Noddy was quietly confronting the most fragile chapter of his life. His battle with cancer changed everything. In a rare admission, his wife Karen shared how Noddy had been diagnosed with a form of throat cancer years earlier, and doctors had given him a grim prognosis. For many, the news was shocking. The man whose voice had roared through the speakers of sold-out arenas was now struggling with the very instrument that had defined his career. In private, Noddy endured rounds of treatment, grueling recoveries, and the emotional toll of staring mortality in the face. Yet remarkably, he never allowed the illness to completely define him. What set Noddy apart was his determination to keep living with humor and dignity. Friends who visited during his recovery years recall how he would make light of his situation, often cracking jokes about his battle scars from treatment. Even when his body was weak, his spirit remained defiant. For Noddy, laughter wasn't just medicine, it was survival. Karen described him as a fighter, someone who never gave up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Their marriage became the cornerstone of his later years, with Karen providing unwavering support. She was there through every appointment, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt. For Noddy, fame may have come and gone, but Karen's love was the constant that kept him going. While illness slowed him down physically, Noddy's legacy only grew stronger. Every December, Merry Xmas Everybody would re-enter the charts, reminding the world of his enduring influence. The royalties from that one song alone became a financial lifeline, but more importantly, it was a cultural one. Each year, millions of families sang along, blissfully unaware of the pain their rock idol was enduring behind closed doors. Noddy himself admitted, with a grin, that it was a strange feeling to be permanently associated with Christmas. "It's like being Santa Claus without the beard," he once joked. But beyond the festive anthem, Noddy's contribution to rock music was undeniable. Slade paved the way for glam rock, influencing artists from Kiss to Oasis. His voice was instantly recognizable, his stage presence unmatched, and his songwriting captured both rebellion and joy. Even as his health declined, Noddy remained proud of the legacy he helped create. He knew that generations to come would still be chanting those infectious choruses, stomping their feet, and remembering the wild man with the top hat and mirrored sunglasses. The most heartbreaking part of Noddy's later years was how quietly he faded from public view. Unlike many rock stars who staged farewell tours or penned explosive memoirs, Noddy chose a quieter path. He appeared occasionally on television and radio, his humor still sharp, but the fire of his earlier career had dimmed. Fans speculated about his health, but true to his nature, Noddy downplayed the seriousness of his condition. He didn't want pity. He wanted to be remembered as the larger-than-life performer he had always been. In interviews, he reflected on fame with a mix of pride and weariness. He acknowledged that the music industry had been unforgiving, that his voice had paid the price for years of relentless performing, and that fame had often come at the cost of personal peace. But he also expressed gratitude for the fans who never stopped singing, for the bandmates who stood beside him, and for the family who loved him beyond the stage persona. As Noddy turned 79, the reality of his situation became harder to ignore. Reports of his frail health spread, and fans flooded social media with messages of love and support. They shared old concert footage, personal stories of meeting him, and heartfelt thanks for the joy his music had brought into their lives. For many, Noddy wasn't just a rock star. He was the soundtrack to their youth, the voice of celebration, and a reminder of an era when music was loud, unapologetic, and fun. Today, Noddy Holder's story is both heartbreaking and inspiring. He may no longer command the stage, but his presence lingers in every stomp, every cheer, and every chorus of "So Here It Is, Merry Christmas." His journey, from working-class beginnings in Birmingham to global stardom, to private battles with illness, is a testament to the complexity of fame. It reminds us that behind every legend is a human being, vulnerable, flawed, and resilient. In the end, Noddy Holder's legacy is not just about the music he created, but about the courage with which he faced life's final act. His voice may have quieted, but his spirit roars on. And every time his timeless anthem plays, we are reminded of the man who gave everything to rock and roll, and who, even in heartbreak, remained unforgettable.